Rain hammered the cracked sidewalk of 5th Street as 18-year-old Mia Bennett pulled her thin jacket tighter and pressed her back against the wall of a closed pharmacy. She had exactly $11, a backpack with 2 shirts, and nowhere to sleep. 3 weeks ago, she had a home. Then her aunt, the only family she had left, passed away, and the landlord changed the locks before Mia even finished packing. She was alone. Truly alone. Or so she thought. It was a Tuesday morning, grey and cold, when a man in a grey suit found her outside a shelter. He introduced himself as Mr. Alvarez, a lawyer representing the estate of Rosa Bennett, MIA's grandmother, a woman Mia had never met, who had died 6 months earlier in another state. "Your grandmother left you something," he said, sliding an envelope into her trembling hands. Inside was a single brass key, tied with faded red string, and a folded deed. The deed named one property, an old restaurant on Miller Avenue, boarded up for over a decade. Bennett's Kitchen. Mia almost laughed. A restaurant. She didn't even have a place to sleep, and now she owned a building nobody wanted. "It's yours," Mr. Alvarez said. "Free and clear. No debts attached. Your grandmother made sure of that before she passed." For the first time in 3 weeks, Mia felt something other than exhaustion. She felt hope, small, fragile, but real. She walked 2 miles to Miller Avenue with nothing but the key in her fist. The restaurant stood between a laundromat and a vacant lot, its windows grimy, its sign hanging by one bolt. Bennett's Kitchen, estimated 1978. Her hand shook as she fit the brass key into the lock. It resisted, rusted from years of neglect, but finally turned with a groan that echoed down the empty street. The door creaked open. Dust hung in the air like fog. Chairs were stacked against one wall, cobwebs stretched between them. But what stopped Mia in the doorway wasn't the dust or the decay, it was the smell. Faint, but unmistakable. Cinnamon and roasted garlic, buried under years of stale air, as if the walls themselves remembered every meal ever cooked there. On the counter sat a photograph in a cracked frame, a young woman laughing behind a stove, flour on her cheeks, and beside her, an older man with the same brass key hanging from his belt. Mia recognized her own eyes staring back from the photograph. Her mother. She had never seen her mother smile like that. Tucked behind the photograph was a second envelope, yellowed with age, addressed simply, "For whoever opens this door again." If you are reading this, you carry the Bennett name, and that means you carry more strength than you know. This restaurant fed a neighborhood for 30 years. It fed people who had nothing, on nights they had nowhere else to go. I never turned away a hungry stranger, and neither did your mother. We lost this place to hard times, not to failure. If you have found your way back here, it is because you needed a home, and a home is exactly what this building was built to give. MIA's tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. She had spent 3 weeks believing she had nothing. She had spent her whole life believing her family had abandoned her. But the letter told a different story, one of loss, not abandonment. One of love that outlived the people who gave it. Beneath the letter was a small ledger, its pages filled with recipes in 3 different sets of handwriting. Her great-grandmother's, her grandmother's, and her mother's. 3 generations of women who had cooked in this exact kitchen, who had built something out of nothing, exactly as Mia now had to. That night, Mia didn't sleep on the street. She swept a corner of the kitchen, laid out a blanket she found in a supply closet, and lay beneath the counter where her mother once stood. For the first time since her aunt's death, she felt something steady beneath her, not walls that could be taken from her, but a foundation that belonged to her by blood and by right. She woke to sunlight cutting through the grime on the windows, and for a moment, she forgot she was homeless at all. Not everyone who came to Bennett's Kitchen came with kindness. On her second week there, a man in an expensive coat knocked on the door while Mia was scrubbing grease from the old stove. He introduced himself as a developer representing a company that wanted the entire block, including her lot, for a new apartment complex. "This place is worthless to you," he said, glancing at the peeling paint and broken tiles. "I'll pay triple what it's worth. Cash, by Friday." For a moment, Mia hesitated. Triple the worth of a crumbling building was more money than she had ever imagined holding. It would mean an apartment, food, safety, everything she had been fighting for on the street just weeks earlier. But she thought of the letter, of her grandmother's handwriting, of the words, "I never turned away a hungry stranger." She thought of the smell of cinnamon that had greeted her the day she opened that door, as if the building itself had been holding its breath, waiting for her. "It's not for sale," she said quietly. The developer laughed, told her she'd change her mind once winter came and the pipes froze again, and left his card on the counter. Mia dropped it in the trash without looking at it twice. The following weeks were brutal. Mia scrubbed floors with water carried in buckets, because the utilities had been shut off for years. She sold her aunt's old bracelet, the last thing she owned of value, to pay the first month of electricity. She patched the roof with materials donated by a neighbor who remembered eating at Bennett's kitchen as a child. She slept on that same blanket beneath the counter for over a month, waking at dawn to scrape paint and haul debris before her hands were too numb from the cold to work. There were nights she cried alone in the dark, wondering if she had made a mistake refusing the developer's money. But every morning, she found a new reason to keep going. A neighbor leaving a bag of nails on the doorstep, a child pressing her nose to the window and asking when it would open, an old photograph of her mother's laughter that never let her forget why this place mattered. Word spread slowly through the neighborhood. An old man named Walter, who had eaten breakfast there every morning for 15 years before it closed, showed up one afternoon with a toolbox and fixed the stove for free. "Your grandmother gave me a meal once when I had no money and no pride left to ask for one," he said. "This is me paying that back." A woman named Denise, who ran the laundromat next door, brought second-hand tables and chairs she'd been storing for no reason she could explain. "I always thought this place would open again," she said. "Guess I was just waiting for the right person." One by one, strangers became allies. Mia realized the restaurant had never truly been abandoned. It had been waiting for someone who needed it as much as it needed her. 3 months after she first turned that brass key, Mia stood behind the same counter in the photograph, wearing her grandmother's apron, her mother's recipes taped to the wall beside the stove. The sign outside had been repainted. The windows gleamed. A small crowd gathered outside, neighbors, old customers, people who remembered the smell of cinnamon and garlic drifting down Miller Avenue. She flipped the sign to open. The bell above the door rang for the first time in over a decade. By the end of the night, every table was full. Walter sat in his old seat by the window. Denise brought her whole family. Mr. Alvarez, the lawyer, came simply to see what his envelope had become, and left with tears in his eyes and a container of leftovers in his hands. Mia stood in the middle of her kitchen, surrounded by warmth, noise, and the smell of 100 meals cooking at once, and understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. She hadn't just inherited a building. She had inherited a purpose. Homeless at 18, with $11 and no place to sleep, Mia Bennett opened a door she thought led to nothing, and found everything she had lost waiting on the other side. Not walls. Not money. Family. Purpose. A home built from love that time and hardship could never fully erase. Bennett's kitchen still stands on Miller Avenue today. The bell above the door still rings every morning at 7. And somewhere in that kitchen, 3 generations of handwriting still guide every dish that leaves the stove, proof that sometimes, the thing we think has abandoned us has only ever been waiting for us to come home. The developer never came back with another offer. Mia never learned why, and never cared enough to ask. She had everything she needed within 4 walls that finally, truly, belonged to her. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons between lunch and dinner, Mia takes the cracked photograph down from the wall and looks at her mother's laughing face, flour dusted across her cheeks. She no longer feels like a stranger looking in on a family she never knew. She feels like she is standing beside her, same kitchen, same light, carrying the same fire forward. If you had told Mia, shivering against that pharmacy wall in the rain, that within a year she would own a restaurant filled every night with laughter and warm plates of food, she would not have believed you. But that is the story of Bennett's kitchen, proof that inheritance is not always about what is left behind. Sometimes it is about what is waiting to be found.